Recognizing nervous system war zones. Let's go ahead and talk about what a nervous system war zone is. It's essentially an environment that you're probably not going to be able to outregulate, meaning, even if you know how to self regulate, you know how to release tension, adrenaline, emotion from the body, you know how to calm your nervous system. In this case, the environment is so stressful that you're either going to have an extremely difficult time calming yourself down, or depending on the severity of the environment, you may not be able to ever fully get calm because the environment is truly just so triggering for you. I always say, as long as the environment is safe and your brain is just perceiving threat because you're experiencing sensory data that is similar to something painful from your past, we can desensitize that, right? But if there is actual abuse or just extreme toxicity that is just constant coming from your environment, that's different. You may need to leave that environment before you can truly downregulate your nervous system and become calm again. So a nervous system war zone is an environment that is highly, okay, and I want to emphasize the word highly because every environment at times can have some of these things in there, right? Being unstable or unpredictable or a little bit chaotic, right? We're talking highly, meaning it's a very severe degree of this and it happens on a continual basis, okay? Just like, for example, people throw the word narcissism around, and whenever somebody says, that somebody's a narcissist, I'm like, okay, so what are the 9 traits? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, exactly. You haven't even studied the 9 traits, and yet you're saying that somebody's a narcissist. So a narcissist is somebody who operates in most or more of the 9 traits of narcissism on a consistent basis in an extreme way. So just because somebody gaslights one time or projects something or lies or manipulates does not make them a narcissist. And there are real narcissists out there. Believe me, I've been under narcissistic abuse multiple times, and I didn't even know what was happening because they were covert narcissists. There's overt and covert. But I'm just using that as an example. Just because your environment has these things, don't get stressed out and think, oh gosh, it's a nervous system war zone. We're talking a very high level of these things consistently, to the point where it's just creating a nervous system war zone, meaning you can't downregulate your nervous system. So an environment that is highly unstable, unpredictable, chaotic, punitive, or aggressive, okay? So all those are pretty self-explanatory, but punitive, what does that mean? That means that you're in an environment at work or home or both, which I've actually been in a season of my life where I was in a nervous system war zone at work and at home. That was actually the second time that I started to deal with depersonalization, realization, and symptoms of traumatic stress, is because my whole life was a war zone. But punitive means you have disproportionate consequences for your mistakes or just bad things that you do. You do the smallest thing and you just get extreme consequences because of people, a person or people. And so with that being said, that's what a nervous system war zone is. So we're about to go very deep, and make sure you watch this whole video because we have a lot to unpack here. We first need to talk about why you can't see that you're in a nervous system war zone, or maybe you're watching this for a loved one. And maybe you can see just how toxic or even abusive their environment is. And maybe you've even tried to talk to them like, that's not normal. Like, why are you putting up with that? And you love them and you care about them. Maybe you've even gotten frustrated with them and it's hurt the relationship because you just want to just shake them and just be like, wake up. Like, what are you doing? Well, whether it's you, the person who's in the nervous system war zone listening to this, or maybe you're watching this for a loved one, I'm going to give you 3 reasons that are very important for you to know, because I think it'll allow you to have either grace on yourself or grace and compassion for the person who's in this war zone, that there is a reason that you, the loved one, can see it, but the person in the war zone can't see it. Or if you're in the war zone, there's a reason that you can't see it and your loved ones can see it. So whenever I'm helping a client that I'm working with desensitize their sensory triggers, which are pieces of sensory data that are similar to painful things from their past, and it's confusing their nervous system, making it think that there's a threat in the present, it puts their body into fight, flight, freeze. One of the things that we do is exposure. We also couple that with relaxation because it doubles the signals of safety being sent to the nervous system. But you've heard of this, right? Exposure therapy is technically what it's called. So whenever you intentionally put yourself in an environment or around certain sensory data, your brain starts to recondition to believe that it's safe, because if there was a lion present, the last thing that you would do is be in that environment. And so, maybe you've got a history of avoiding sensory triggers. Let's just say, for example, driving anxiety or social anxiety, right? You felt anxious and you started to avoid it. That actually makes it worse, because whatever you run from, your brain assumes is a lion trying to eat you. And so I would say, okay, let's face these sensory triggers. Let's also couple that with relaxation, and continual exposure is going to desensitize it. There's something called neuroplasticity. Our brain is plastic. You can change it, which is good news if you're suffering with anxiety and panic and depersonalization, realization, all these things. I used to suffer those things myself. I don't anymore because I went through this process of rewiring my brain. But while this can work in the positive, it also can work in the negative. Because if you are in a nervous system war zone, and maybe initially you know that things are off. Your boss flies off the handle, or there's some toxic or abusive coworker, or maybe it's a relationship, romantic or non. And you notice these things at first, but you decide to stay. And I get that there are logistical reasons that, sometimes you get love bombed if it's in the context of a romantic relationship. Love bombing is where somebody makes you believe that they are just the best thing that ever happened to you, and they flood you with compliments and vacations and just all these things. But it's a manipulation tactic. And then by the time that you figure out what's going on, maybe you share children with them, maybe it's a job where you just financially just couldn't get away from it, even though you knew that something was off. I'm not saying you should feel any shame at all for these things. I'm just being objective here. For some reason, whatever it is, and especially you might have been manipulated to not even see what was going on, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but you stayed in that environment. And over time, because of exposure to that environment, you started to get desensitized to the toxicity and the chaos. And you still know that things are off, but it's like a 2 out of 10 instead of a 10 out of 10. Right? Through repeated exposure, your brain has desensitized that environment. I remember before I started doing this 7 years ago, I was working at a company, and it was a manual labor job, hauling groceries. Very, 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 very taxing on the body. And I noticed that I was having less and less time to do the same amount of work. And I mean, we're talking, I was probably walking 20 to 30 miles a day, lifting 20 to 30,000 pounds a day, boxes anywhere ranging from 5 to 50 pounds, constantly bending, to get boxes out of these tiny little slots, hit my head all the time, pallet jacks and forklifts and stock pickers just going back and forth. And, sometimes there'd be a forklift driver that was getting a pallet down from a slot that was 100 feet in the air, and all these groceries and even the pallet, which is made of wood, would just fall and smash on the floor. I mean, it was a miracle that people didn't get killed there. But anyway, it definitely was a nervous system war zone. There's no question. And I remember one time I looked before I stepped out off my pallet jack to start to get a box or whatever. and there was a forklift coming down full speed. And if I wouldn't have looked, he didn't honk because everybody at that job was exhausted and tired, and a lot of people were injured. I was having sciatic nerve pain. My arm was injured, and they were afraid to report the injuries because of very toxic bosses. But anyway, I easily would have either been paralyzed or died if I would not have looked. Just to give you an idea, it was controlled chaos, okay? So anyway, with that being said, I remember one time I talked to one of my managers about this, one of the only managers that hadn't sold his soul to the company, really great guy. And I was like, man, I mean, I'm getting less and less time to do the same amount of work, and I can't do this safely. And it's not right. And he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, yeah, Jordan, but people adapt. And I said to him, but they shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to adapt to an environment that places money over safety. And he didn't have anything to say after that because it's like he himself had to adapt, right? And I get that. He's got a family to support. It's fine. As far as I get why people do what they do. I mean, it's not fine, but you get what I mean by that. I don't judge him for that. He had to tell himself something to make it okay that he was a part of this environment where people's lives were in jeopardy. But regardless, he was right in the sense of the longer that I was there, the longer that I normalized things, that once I quit that job, within a day or two of being away from that job, once I got some proximity, I was like, my God, I can't believe that became normal to me. I didn't even see this thing or that thing as a big deal. Driving around, barely getting any sleep because I was so exhausted. Everybody, running around like a chicken with their head cut off, trying to meet these impossible numbers, like being basically threatened that if you report an injury, you're going to get fired. And it was just absolutely horrible. But through exposure, people desensitized to it, and they knew that it was bad, but they didn't recognize how bad. Maybe whenever they started, it was a 10, but because of desensitization, now it's like a 1 or a 2. Okay. And hey, and I don't judge those people. It was a great paying job. They got families to feed. I get it. But I'm just trying to explain what happens whenever you're in a nervous system war zone and you don't leave. Eventually, you're not able to see how severe that it is. And maybe other people are coming into your life and they're like, what are you doing? Like, that's not normal. You need to leave. But you don't even see it as that big of a deal anymore because of desensitization. So the second reason that you may be in a nervous system war zone, or your loved one may be in a nervous system war zone, and they can't recognize it, is because our brain assumes that what's familiar is safe, right? Have you ever known somebody, or maybe you've been this person, and again, no shame, but they just go from toxic relationship to toxic relationship, maybe even abusive relationship, and you're sitting back and you're like, why do you keep choosing these partners that are so terrible for you? And it just doesn't make any logical sense to you. Or maybe it's you, and you're just like, why do I keep choosing these people that are toxic for me and maybe even abusive? Well, it's because even though that's not good for you, there's a sense of safety that comes from that because it's familiar. Our brain assumes that what's familiar is safe and what's unfamiliar is dangerous. And that also explains why either you, or maybe this is a loved one, tried to get into stable, loving relationships, and they sabotaged it because it felt dangerous. Maybe you had a safe person that was actually loving you unconditionally and not verbally, mentally, emotionally, or any other kind of abusing you. And you didn't know why, but you found yourself being very triggered by that, and you sabotaged it. And then you left them and got right back with somebody, or maybe your loved one, who was toxic. Well, it's not because you're a bad person. It's because the chaos is familiar to you and you feel safest in the chaos, or your loved one feels safest in these unstable, aggressive, punitive, chaotic environments. And it's very sad. And a lot of people, unfortunately, never break that cycle, which you can, by the way, right? You can retrain your body to perceive safety around stability, but it's going to take time. But most people, they run. It's like, this is so uncomfortable for me. It's unfamiliar for me, being loved right, being treated respectfully. I don't even know what to do with this. So I'm going to avoid, I'm going to run. But if you stay in that environment and you calm your body and you remind yourself, hey, this is safe, this is normal, eventually you can desensitize that as far as perceiving threat around stability. But anyway, that's one reason why people don't recognize a nervous system war zone, is because it's almost like a magnet. It's like they don't know why, but they're drawn to it. They know that it's not good, but there's something inside of them that just keeps pulling them back, and it's familiar. Thus, their brain believes that it's safe. And I want to say one more example. So whenever I'm working with a client and I help them get out of fight, flight, freeze response, and they start to get what we call a glimmer. They start to go back into technically what's called their social engagement system, which is the part of the nervous system that turns back online whenever their brain perceives safety, which is called neuroception. That's a term coined by Dr. Stephen Porges, who's a neuroscientist. He founded the polyvagal theory. Check that out. It's an awesome understanding of the nervous system. But anyway, they get a glimmer where they feel normal again. They feel connected to their body, their environment. They can easily socially engage. They can think. And guess what happens? Most of the time, they feel stressed about that. They feel anxious. I call it state transition anxiety. They're anxious about being calm. Why? Because they've been in a state of survival for years. And it's familiar to them to be stressed and anxious and overwhelmed or depersonalized or derealized or whatever symptoms that they're facing. It's unfamiliar to feel safely embodied and calm. And so thus, because it's unfamiliar, they become stressed about it. Now, it's just temporary. And I tell people, eventually, if you continue on the path of communicating safety to your nervous system, feeling calm is going to become the new normal, because that's what's going to be familiar. And then feeling stressed is going to be unfamiliar and feel weird. Okay, but just to use an example. So the third reason why you may not be able to recognize a nervous system war zone is because, again, it's either at work or at home, most likely. You're around a person or people who have manipulated you to not see the severity of what you're going through. I heard this quote one time. Toxic or abusive people will condition you to believe that the problem is not the abuse itself, but rather your reaction to it. You're being too sensitive. You misunderstood. You're actually the problem. There's something called projection, which is especially narcissistic abuse, but it's not just used by narcissists. But manipulative people love projection. They literally take their issues and they project it onto their victims and make it appear as if it's actually the victim that is doing that thing. So let's say that the person is lying. Well, they'll literally project that onto the victim and say, you're lying. Or maybe they're cheating. Well, they'll tell their victim, no, you're probably cheating on me. And that really, really creates chaos, especially if you're an empath like me, very high levels of empathy, really care about people. And, it creates internal chaos because you start to question your integrity. And it's really something that messes with your psyche, especially over extended periods of time. And eventually you may just, as an adaptation defense mechanism, maybe like, you know what, you're right. Maybe I am like this. But there's also something called gaslighting, right? There was an old movie where, I forget what it's called, but there were these kerosene lamps, and I think it was this guy and it was his wife. I could be wrong in that. But basically he dimmed the lamps and then he told his wife that they weren't dim or something like that. He basically was denying her reality. That's where the term gaslighting comes from. You're basically denying somebody's reality, where they're coming to you and saying, hey, here's how I'm feeling, or here's the truth, and you just flat out deny that as if it doesn't exist. And so if you've been gaslit, if you've experienced projection and lying and all these different manipulation tactics, especially something called leveling, which is definitely something that narcissistic people do, but it's not exclusive to that. It's where they constantly put you down to build themselves up, and they'll minimize their involvement and or outright deny their involvement and maximize your involvement. And they'll take the smallest thing and make it appear as if it's the worst thing. Again, going back to the punitive side of things. And you're always the source of the problems. And if you stay in that environment long enough where you're always the problem and they take the smallest thing and make it seem as if it's the biggest deal, what's going to start to happen is you're not only not going to be able to see how toxic this nervous system war zone is that's coming through this person or people, but you're actually going to think that you're the problem. And instead of getting out of this nervous system war zone, you're going to be running on a hamster wheel trying to make this person accept you and love you. And you're going to try to convince them, no, I'm not like that. It's the ultimate manipulation tactic. And so if you are running on a hamster wheel trying to make this person happy, guess what you're not doing? You're not recognizing what you're going through. And here's where it goes even deeper. You may even believe that you deserve the instability, the unpredictability, the chaos, the punitive action, the aggression. You may have been brainwashed, or your loved one may have been brainwashed to believe they are deserving of these things. And I know that because I have been in connections with people like that, romantic and non, multiple romantic, multiple non-romantic, where they took advantage of my empathy. They took advantage of the fact that I'm a very agreeable person, and they conditioned me to believe that I was absolutely horrible. And I spent years running on a hamster wheel trying to convince them, because I thought that they just needed more evidence and facts. But the problem was, it was like a Venus flytrap. They lured me in, and it was doing something for them. It made them feel superior. It made them feel a sense of identity, whatever. And that's why you need to get educated about especially covert manipulation tactics. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. So how do I know if I'm in a nervous system war zone? That's the ultimate goal of this training, but we first had to establish those three things. Well, if you're the person that's wondering this, you have to accept that you are not going to be able to recognize this. That's part of the problem. That is the problem, right? Why? Because the environment has been desensitized through repeated exposure. The environment feels safe due to being familiar. And this third one may or may not be there, but it's very common. You may have been manipulated to not see the severity of what you're going through. So that's why people stay in nervous system war zones, is because they're depending on their ability to see it. And because of these three factors, they can't see it. What really is a 10 feels like a 1 or a 2. And it takes something like catastrophic for them to even feel like something is off. So you have to accept, if you are the person that's wondering if you're in a nervous system war zone, or if you're the loved one watching this, you have to accept that they can't see it. Your loved one can't see the chaos because of those three factors. So let's say that you are the person who is possibly in a nervous system war zone. You're probably going to find that there have been loving, wise people who have been telling you for years that this isn't normal. And they've probably grown frustrated, and you got frustrated at them maybe because you were like, oh no, it's really not that bad. And I mean, I did this and I did that. So it's like, I'm almost worthy of it. But part of how you're going to know that you're in a nervous system war zone is you have to accept that you are not able to recognize it. And if you have multiple wise people, be careful, okay? You need to get multiple opinions on this. But if you have multiple wise people who are all saying the same thing, I want you to consider that maybe they're able to see things that you can't see because they are not in that environment. It hasn't been desensitized through exposure. It's not familiar to them, and they haven't been manipulated to believe that you're worthy of that. And so they're able to see things that you can't see, but you haven't listened to them. And that's okay. Again, none of this is to bring shame. We're just trying to help you get out of this. But you didn't listen to them. And it feels like they're being unreasonable. It feels like maybe they're even trying to, sabotage your relationship. You might have even stopped talking to these people because you're like, oh, if they really cared about me, they would, let me keep this job or let me stay in this relationship. And especially if you're under abuse, you might have been conditioned to really defend the abuser because they play the victim. And you might be like, no, they've been through this. They had this type of childhood and this thing. And we're not trying to minimize those things. But there's never an excuse for abuse, okay? Or even just constant toxicity. Everybody's been through hard things. Not trying to say some people haven't been through more hard things, but you've been trained and conditioned to not see the severity of what you're going through. So you have a tendency to defend the toxic or abusive person, minimize their behavior, and maximize your own behavior. And also, you don't even see that it's a big deal because it's been desensitized and it feels familiar and things like that. And so you're going to have to take a leap of faith and believe, you know what, emotionally and mentally, it feels like these loving people, these wise people are being unreasonable, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to get proximity. You will only be able to see that you are in a nervous system war zone whenever you get some distance from that environment. And the more distance for a long period of time, or just the longer the better, the more that you will be able to see what's really going on. And if you step away from that environment, and every day that goes by, you're like, you know what? Wow, maybe that actually wasn't normal. I put up with that? Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh, I didn't even see that. And your eyes start being opened. Now you are equipped with all the knowledge that you need to get out of that environment and stay out of that environment. But a lot of people will never do this because they're assuming that their perceptions are valid whenever their perceptions may be distorted because of these three factors. Okay, just like whenever I left that, that toxic job, for example, I remember every day that went by, I was like, man, I can't believe that became normal to me. That is so abnormal. There's things that you can't see outside of proximity. And if you've got multiple, and you might have to hire somebody, you might have to hire a therapist or a counselor. In fact, I was on Instagram the other day and there was this really cool meme video, and this lady specialized in helping, I think it was helping women particularly, heal after toxic abusive relationships. Like, find somebody who is trained to see these things. Get some help for this. It might be a pastor, might be a counselor, might be a coach, whoever it is. Hire them. Or maybe you've got people. Maybe you've got your mom or your dad or your brothers or sisters or your coworkers, and they've been telling you and you haven't listened to them. Just take a leap of faith. Spend 2 weeks away, a month, 6 months, the longer the better. And your eyes may be open. They may not be. You may actually realize, you know what, maybe they were exaggerating. Maybe this wasn't the case. But there's only one way to find out, and that is proximity. And I know that is not easy. It's not, logistically feasible to do that immediately for some people. And I get that. I understand that. That's one of the hardest things, is sometimes it's not a matter of, just leaving or not leaving. Maybe even you've thought about leaving before, but you're financially codependent on this person, or, that person has told you that there will be consequences if you walk away, or maybe it's a job, maybe, you're financially dependent. Listen, I get that. But here's the action steps. If you don't have wise people in your life who are giving you their perspective, get those people in your life. Or if they have been in your life, just listen to them and make a plan to get some proximity for as long of a period of time as you can. even if it takes 6 months, even if it takes a year, you're only going to fully know due to proximity. And what I will tell you is, I know that for some of you, this may look like a divorce. And I think people should try to fight for their marriage. For some of you, this may look like quitting a job. And I believe that you should try to, make it work at a job. But at the end of the day, if you're in a nervous system war zone and you really, really want to be able to feel calm and safely embodied and enjoy the present moment and enjoy your life, I promise you, as somebody who was in multiple nervous system war zones at many times in my life with multiple different people, that the short-term cost is worth the long-term peace. Because in this life, you can have everything, but if you don't have peace, you don't have anything. And it's worth, like, the best investment that you can make is an investment in you, an investment in your nervous system. And don't let that short-term consequences or cost keep you from making that long. You got to start looking at the long term. Look 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. If you get away from these environments, whether it's at work or home, you now have a chance to start fresh. And there is life on the other side of this. And I will also say, you can waste your life. I can't tell you how many people that I have spoken with or seen their comments on some of my videos where they stayed in these nervous system war zones. And they're like, yeah, it took me 20 years before I finally walked away, 30 years, 40 years sometimes. Like, if you want a happy, healthy, calm life, you're going to have to fight for it. I know you know this, but I'll just tell you that it's worth it. Okay. That's all I can tell you, is it's worth the fight. It's worth whatever consequences that you have to go through in the end. Okay. That is it. Click like, it'll help the YouTube algorithm get this out. If you know somebody who's in a nervous system war zone, maybe consider sending them this video. Be careful though, right? You don't want to hurt the relationship. You might just have to plant some seeds every now and then, and make sure to keep that even if you see your loved one in a relationship, or maybe it's a job or something, and it's destroying them. Be careful to not let that frustration, which is really love, right, rob you of an open door into their life. Be gentle, because remember, they can't see what's going on. You can see it, but they can't. And you might just have to plant some seeds and be like, hey, I came across this video. I was just wondering, like, maybe this applies to you, maybe it doesn't, but I wanted you to just watch this. And if they start to get defensive, then just say, hey, no problem. We don't have to talk about it. I just want to let you know, I feel like, you're dealing with some things that are just not normal, and I love you. I care about you. But I'm not going to talk. But just know, if you ever want to talk about this, I'm here for you. Sometimes in love, you have to sit and watch somebody suffer and keep that relationship open, keep the door open, because maybe eventually they do see it. But here's the thing though. There are only one of two scenarios that I've observed in my own personal life and observing others whenever it comes to this situation. Either one of two things are going to happen. Well, maybe three. Yeah, three scenarios. Number one, they never leave the nervous system war zone. Maybe they don't even know that they're in it. Maybe they just, try to leave but can't for various reasons, whatever. But they just never leave, and it wastes their life, which is devastating and sad to think about. But the second scenario is that maybe they come across this knowledge and they apply this advice and they're able to get out, which is definitely the most ideal. But the third scenario is devastating and not optimal, but at least it does get them out eventually, because remember, what you see as a 10 out of 10, they see as a 1 or a 2 out of 10. This is for the people that your loved one is in a nervous system war zone. So for them, like, their 10 out of 10 is like a 100. But sometimes their life has to completely fall into utter chaos, and they have to hit rock bottom before they will finally walk away. And hopefully that doesn't happen, but unfortunately it usually does happen. because people don't trust outsiders who love them because they've been desensitized to what they're going through. But that's why you want to keep that bridge open, that door open with them. And in love, just don't say anything. Plant a seed maybe once every year or a couple times a year or something, but just be very, very careful. And if their life is falling apart, or let's say if they come across this information and you maintain that relationship with them, they'll reach out to you and they'll be like, you know what, I've had enough. Can you help me transition out of this job or out of this home environment or relationship or whatever? Okay. I know it's hard to watch your loved ones suffer, but sometimes you just have to accept they are their own person. And all you can do is in love educate them and pray from a distance and keep that door open and just hope that they make the right decision. Okay, that is it. Again, hope that this helped you. Comment something below if it did. Like, subscribe, join this community. We'd love to have you be a part of it. We talk about anxiety, panic attacks, depersonalization, organization, trauma, all these different things. And I hope you have a good day.